There's an executive order signed by the president relating to flag burning that a lot of people are speaking of. Is that even constitutional? Didn't the Supreme Court already decide on that? We'll get into it. We'll actually take a closer look at what it says and discuss the legal ramifications, as this is Nuance. And I'm Mike Scala, an attorney and an MC, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist and chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Well, this is yet another one of those things and you wake up and you see like, oh my God, why more, just more. We're 6, 7 months in and this is more crazy talk. Like you said, it seems to be a very clear First Amendment issue and has already been decided by the Supreme Court, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And is it even binding? Can he do this?
Well, did you read the executive order?
Um, I haven't read it word for word.
Okay. So that's what we're going to do. Not necessarily word for word, but we're going to go through it and discuss the major points because he does do a lot of constitutional dancing in there from what I read. And clearly, this was drafted by his attorneys, right, with that issue in mind. So they weren't blind to it. They were actually trying to address the First Amendment implications head on.
Right. And I think he does that a lot. Even with the executive orders, what he'll say on the surface will be have slightly different meaning than what it says inside the order.
Right.
Just like what was it? It reminds me of the into birthright citizenship, right? Just saying it like that sounds like it applies to everyone, but when you get into the weeds of it, it was basically talking about people that are not here legally, people who might be students here, right? It doesn't talk about people who are born here and then they have children, and so it
But
kind of
no, but it did
misleads.
birthright. Hold on a second. Birthright citizenship though does apply to people who are born here. That's where birthright comes from. Citizenship
Yeah, but
by way
that
of
are
birth.
already citizens here is what I mean.
Well,
So, like
they would be
for
born as
example,
citizens. I remember we looked at the executive order. It tried to carve out
right.
categories of people, right, based on
Right.
their interpretations of Supreme Court jurisprudence, right? So
Right. So,
they're
like,
trying
for
to like
example,
find weaknesses in the Supreme Court cases that they can say, okay, maybe we can get away with excluding these people.
right. So what I'm saying is like the saying ending birthright citizenship
Yeah, yeah,
sounds
yeah.
like it applies to everyone. But
Everybody.
for
Right,
example, your children wouldn't be necessarily covered, right?
right,
It's not even at risk under this
right,
executive order
right.
because you are an American citizen and that wouldn't cover it. But when you talk about it in a general sense, in birthright citizenship, it sounds like it is.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of the things that he does and says
Yep.
uh, is like that,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of misleading in a way.
Yeah, and it makes a good soundbite because it gets everyone
Right.
talking, right? It riles up the bases on both sides, for or
Right.
against, and is used as political fodder. And like you said,
Right.
people aren't looking at the nuance. No one's really sitting down and reading these things. Maybe if they are, they don't understand them because they're written in legalese or whatever. So, it just
Right.
becomes that headline is what everyone thinks is true, or what everyone wants to focus on, whether it's true or not.
Right.
Now,
So,
so here's an interesting thing politically. Shout out to Howard Grubbard, the attorney from Brooklyn Gatemouth. Remember Gatemouth, our first endorser back in
right,
2020?
right.
He made the point that the president is really backing Democrats into a corner by doing this. So he's actually, I think, making a
Right.
point that this is good politics for him because it puts Democrats in a position where if they say anything, it sounds like they're defending flag burning, right? It kind of reminded me of the Michael Dukakis debate performance in 1988, where they said it was this big gotcha moment, right? Some people say it's what it cost him the campaign that year, where they asked him if he was opposed to the death penalty, which he was. And the follow up was, well, what if it was your wife who were brutally raped and murdered? I think they said, would you still be opposed to the death penalty? And he gave a very legal policy driven answer. And he said, yes, I'm opposed to the death penalty in all cases. And that was like the scandal of the year, right? In a way, because everyone was like, he came off as cold and detached.
Right.
He should have said that he would want to kill that guy himself, but of course, he didn't show the emotion that was expected of him when that was raised. But really, it was such a gotcha moment. Obviously, he could have answered that in a politically smarter way, but it was kind of manufactured, I think, in a way to make him look bad, almost like a lose lose, right? Like a when did you stop beating your wife kind of question. Have you heard that? Right?
Right.
Like there's really no good way to answer it. It's kind of like
Right.
we're in that here, where if you say anything at all in opposition to this, it's like you get painted as anti American or pro flag burning or something like that, right? When this is really about First Amendment rights, which is supposed to include doing things that society and even we defenders of First Amendment rights deem to be disgusting behavior.
Right. So, and he does that a lot, right? And I think not just him, but even that whole Republican side, they do that a lot because then it sets up the opposition to try to argue a point that on the surface could look like oh that they're the bad guys or that
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones in the wrong.
Right, right.
Yeah. So it's like, even now with what's going on with sending the troops in DC to bring down the crime and this and that, and it's like, when you argue against it, it's like, oh, so you're pro criminal, you're pro crime, you're okay with people living in fear in our nation's capital. What's wrong with you? It's like a way to twist the focus on everything.
Yeah, so I wanted to pull up his quote, Howard's. He said that Democrats really shouldn't say anything about this, but if they do, this might be their answer. This might be the way that they would phrase it. Did he?
But don't they have to? They
He,
have to address this. Don't they
well,
have to address the flag burning?
who says they have to?
Um, don't they have to fight against it though? How would it be addressed?
Well, okay, here we go. His suggestion is to fight it in the courts, but not to make public statements about it necessarily, not to make that the focus of their rhetoric.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So Democrats shouldn't like go on like a
Rant.
media
Right,
run
right.
saying, "Oh my God, he's this thing about the flag burning."
Right, right. Because it kind of makes them look bad to most middle of the road voters.
So who files the lawsuit and fights against it then, if he wants to fight it in the courts?
That's an interesting question, right? Because you have to have standing to bring a lawsuit. So would you actually have someone burn a flag and get arrested for it to challenge it? Or would you say that have someone who wants to conduct this kind of demonstration but wouldn't be able to under this, and so they're kind of preemptively challenging it?
Right.
You have to have a plaintiff who has standing, right? Who stands to suffer injury as a result of this.
Well, I mean, technically any American. I mean, because it's a
Sure.
very, yeah, because
It's chilling.
it
You can say it chills your speech, right?
well,
Like it
not
makes
just
it crazy.
chill, yeah, it chills the speech, but also like, we said that Supreme Court has already ruled that this is First Amendment protection. This is clearly violating First Amendment protection. And so every American has standing in that regard, but then who brings the lawsuit? Can someone do like a class action on behalf of the whole
It
nation?
wouldn't be a class action. It would be someone saying that they would want to engage in this kind of activity, but they'd be afraid of being arrested or something. They couldn't get a permit, or they couldn't proceed with it based on this. So this is the quote that how he wrote a few sentences. He was just funny. I don't know why he wrote this as if he's a politician, but his whole statement here is, and again, this is how he thinks Democrats should respond to the flag burning executive order. His suggested language, he said, if they say anything at all, they have to say something. It would be this: flag burning is a politically counterproductive activity engaged in by imbeciles. It is unpopular because it should be, but it is also protected by the First Amendment. In fact, it exemplifies why we need a First Amendment. Except in a totalitarian society, no one needs constitutional protections to express views which are popular.
Right.
I am proud to live in a country where I'm allowed to burn my flag. It's what makes my flag worth saluting, and it perturbs me that some people want to prevent desecration of the flag by instead desecrating the Bill of Rights. That's interesting, which is perhaps the most precious thing which the flag symbolizes. Okay, so he makes some good points there.
It's a good statement.
Yeah.
I think it's a good statement. Now,
What do you think about the way he starts? It's politically counterproductive activity engaged in by imbeciles. Is that trying to appeal to populism, right? The same way the right does it? Is he trying to kind of co-opt that for a version on the left?
Yeah, I probably would scratch that part out. I see what he's trying to do. He's trying to set up that he's definitely not for flag burning, but and going very far with how he's against flag burning to try to, uh, not raise the ire on the side, or when they do counter back, be like, look, I already said people who do it are imbeciles. What are
Yeah,
you listening to? You know
right,
what I mean?
right.
But I don't think it's necessary.
He's putting that fire out before it even burns, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary to basically to go there with it. Like he could have just started and said, the rest of it without having to go
Uh,
to their imbeciles.
right. But it's interesting because when we talk about the First Amendment, not just in the context of this issue, but it really is about being able to defend speech and expressive activities that we disagree with. But politically, it could always kind of push you into a corner because, let's say someone wants to do hate speech, right? Or have some kind of extremist rally, like, some neo-Nazi type rally or something like that, right? Well, the First Amendment gives people a right to do those kinds of things. And
Right.
if you then say that, right? Like if you say, listen, they have a right to say that, to do that. There are people who are going to come back at you and say, does that mean that you're pro-Nazi or you pro this? It's like, no, I'm pro First Amendment, right? But people will try to obscure the issue that way.
Right. Right. So, like he said, maybe lay out what you mentioned there. He said that this kind of plays against Democrats. It forces them in a bad position. How exactly does that force them into a bad position?
Well, basically, in the way I was just describing, that if they come out and they say this is outrageous, this is crazy, we are solidly opposed to this, then it looks, or at least it will get spun, right? And the narrative will become that they are pro flag burning, right? Because they're
Right.
saying that they don't like the executive order aimed at flag burning. So like some people will try to extrapolate from that. Oh, that means you're a flag burner. you
Right. And now the
burn flags in
conversation
your
has
spare time,
changed.
bro. You know what I mean? You're anti-American. You're not patriotic. You hate this country. You're a lunatic. You're one of the imbeciles that Howard just described. And people will try to remove the constitutional analysis because that's either over their heads
Right.
or they're trying to be reductive, right? They're trying to
Sure.
reduce it to a political soundbite, and they'll make it about the activity, right? Where I think people,
Right.
and listen, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but I think most people who are against an executive order like this aren't saying it's because they want to go out and burn some flags. They're just saying it violates the Constitution.
Right. And it can, any going in that defense, it can runs the risk. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but it runs the
Mm-hmm.
risk of jumping off the topic immediately and going to that. Oh, well, oh, so you like you said, you're a flag burner, so you want to burn some flags? Like it starts now. The conversation's over here instead of where it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Someone has to be able to bring that back and not fall into it. I brought
Right.
up that same. I brought up that same point recently. I did a video a reel on my Instagram and Facebook and stuff in regards to this attack on the museums and this idea that we are, either unfairly talking about slavery and the slaveholders and this and that Trump is making this push towards. And I'm saying, like, we can't engage this conversation. We can't lose the focus and start going, oh, well, have this discussion like there is something to talk about. There's nothing to talk about there, right? It is, it's not a discussion because as soon as you do, then now they've got a point. Now you've changed the
It
topic.
legitimizes it in a way. And
Right,
that's always a tricky thing, right? I remember when Obama was running for president in 2008, I was annoyed when CNN ran a poll asking if Americans were ready for a black president. And I'm like, you're
right,
kind of legitimizing racism almost by doing it. Like you're making it seem like it's a legitimate position to hold. At the same time, it was a political reality, at least at the time, right? That
right,
maybe maybe Americans, based on how they voted and behaved in the past, maybe they wouldn't go for something like that. So
right.
I guess it was valid to ask, but like it's always hard to find, I guess, where
Right.
that line is between like,
Right.
when should you be legitimizing a conversation that doesn't deserve legitimacy? But if the population is there, right? If the population's in a bad place, well, you also don't do yourself any favors by ignoring it altogether either.
Right. Yeah.
So,
So I think the question becomes, since this is, the Supreme Court has already ruled that this constitutional, it's protected free speech, to burn a flag. Is this executive order enforceable?
well, now we have to get into the nuance, right? And the actual language of the executive order. And
Right. So
that's why I
that's,
wanted to do that here. So I pulled it up. I sent you a copy as well. And we can put a
yes.
link in the description or, in the chat. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. The executive order does mention constitutional jurisprudence. It mentions Supreme Court decisions. It actually cites two Supreme Court cases. And it does a dance, right? Like we said, it does kind of remind me of that birthright citizenship one,
Right.
because it kind of dances around the constitutional framework and tries to find where the weaknesses might be or where there may be some possible interpretation that would allow it, right? It doesn't, let's get this clear, right? And this might be a surprise to some. It does not broadly ban flag burning. Now that's interesting, right? You would think that that's exactly what it did, right? That's how this is being discussed. But if you read
Right.
it,
There, and
that's
there's
not
some
what it did.
caveats.
Right. It actually, so broadly speaking, and we can go into more of the detail here in a minute, but broadly speaking, what it does is it doesn't ban the activity of flag burning, but it does allow enforcement against inciting riots. And it says that sometimes burning the flag may incite a riot or be done in conjunction with breaking other laws, right? Other things that actually are illegal. So really,
Right. That's how he's going to
to
get.
be honest, as a lawyer reading this, it really doesn't say anything. You know what I mean? It's really a political document, is what it is. Legally, it's not really doing anything because it's saying that sometimes when you burn the flag, you're also committing other crimes. Like maybe you're committing a hate crime at the same time. You might be inciting a riot. You might be, it says, there are crimes against property and the peace, violations of people's rights, aiding and abetting others committing other and breaking other laws. So it's saying that maybe, while you're doing this, you could be doing something else that is illegal. And that's the behavior we're going to crack down on, which again, that's already illegal. So, it's not like this is making something new illegal, which by the way, to your point, I think it wouldn't be able to do that anyway because you need Congress to do that, not an executive
Right.
order. The president can't decide what's legal and what's not legal.
Right. And I think that's, again, that's part of the dance that also tries to legitimize some of it, where he's making these little caveats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I believe one of it says something about, I'll have to look at it, but like when it's done to incite a riot, or when it's done with violence, or something like that, it's like you're really focusing on the violence, but you're attaching this to it
Right.
to try to try to make this point.
Yeah, I think it's effective politically in that most people just get the headlines, right? It takes advantage of the fact that that's the society we live in, right? Where most people get their news just from the headlines that get posted and not from reading the articles or reading the executive orders, reading the laws, reading the court cases. Most people aren't doing that, right? They're scrolling on their phones or whatever and they're seeing the headlines. And I think it does this well because the headline is he signed an executive order against flag burning. Whoa. Then you read it, and like we said, it's very careful. It actually says that the Supreme Court decided that you can't have viewpoint discrimination, right? That just burning the flag alone is protected by the First Amendment. I mean, it's acknowledging that here. It's saying that if you do that while committing a crime, we're going to
Right.
go after you for those other crimes. Okay, great. That's nothing new.
Right. Um, would they be able to tack on any penalties because of this?
There's no legal basis for that. No,
Right.
no. So let's
So
go through it
it's
a
kind
little
of a
bit.
word salad, but
It
yeah, go ahead.
is.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's. I mean, I guess it's smart politics in a sense. right? I mean,
It's dangerous
it's
politics.
dangerous, but it may be effective, right? It's one of those things. Um, from a legal perspective, right? As a lawyer looking at this, I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? So let's dive into it here. Section one, purpose, right? What is the purpose of this? And it goes on. Yeah, our great American flag is the most sacred and cherished symbol of the USA and of American freedom, identity, and strength. Okay, it talks about many thousands of American patriots have fought, bled, and died to keep the stars and stripes waving proudly. All right, so all of the positive things we want to say about the
The
flag,
patriotic, yeah, the patriotic
very
things
very
to kind of get
patriotic
you
sounding,
hyped up, to get you to buy in.
get you going. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then it says desecrating it is uniquely offensive and provocative. It is a statement of contempt, hostility, and violence against our nation. Okay, here we go. This is where it starts getting into the law, right? How they start dancing around the Constitution. Burning this representation of America may incite violence and riot. Now, why is that sentence in there? Because we know that while speech is protected by the First Amendment, inciting violence is not. Inciting a
Right.
riot is not. And this comes from the case
Right.
law, right? Like this is well established First Amendment law that you have to draw a line somewhere. It's like the whole fire in a crowded theater example people use, right? You have a right to
Right.
free speech, but you can't use your speech to incite violence. So that is blatantly put in the executive order. Again, this is how you know lawyers very carefully wrote this, right, with the
Right.
First Amendment issues in mind. Now, next sentence. American flag burning is also used by groups of foreign nationals as a calculated act to intimidate and threaten violence against Americans because of their nationality and place of birth. So why is that in it? Now he's getting into discriminating against people based on where they're born and, again, inciting violence, threatening violence, intimidating. So
I think that that also invokes images of what they used to show on TV when like Al Qaeda or some of these places would be in the streets burning American flags and dancing. So they're
sure.
trying to liken it to this type of energy to
Right.
again
Right.
bring more support for their position.
But they're also using language that they know favors them constitutionally, right? We're
Right,
talking about threatening violence and
right. They're dancing.
yeah, I think because later on, again, if you get into step two, when they start going into more concrete detail, they mention illegal discrimination against American citizens or violations of American civil rights. So that's what they're kind of, I think, get at with that they're trying to hit on that point. But
Right.
here's where they acknowledge the Supreme Court's decisions on this. It says, notwithstanding the Supreme Court's rulings on First Amendment protections, the court has never held that American flag desecration conducted in a manner that is likely to incite imminent lawless action. Remember that's from Windsor, not imminent lawless action. Remember,
Right.
that's the Supreme Court standard, right? Imminent lawless action. That's when it becomes no longer protected by the First Amendment. The Again, it says the court has never held that desecration conducted in a manner that is likely to incite imminent lawless action or that is an action about into fighting words is constitutionally protected. And it quotes Texas v. Johnson, 1989. Now, this is kind of funny to me because they're saying fighting words are not constitutionally protected. That's something that would come straight out of law school. And I wonder how young these lawyers are who wrote this, or how because fighting words is not something that really comes up much in the real world anymore, but it's something that every law student reads about when they study the Constitution, right? What are the exceptions to free speech? Fighting words. It's an old one. I think.
Right. You're talking cowboy days and before.
Yeah. Maybe even
Yeah.
if we want to take it to recent history, World War II, like calling someone a Nazi in that era, that kind of thing, where it's like the very utterance of the word is basically inciting violence, right? Like,
Right.
like, like the idea was, and it was never formally overturned. This is what we learned in law school. It was never formally overturned by the Supreme Court, but as a society, we kind of moved away from that idea, right? Because it's an old idea, right? The idea is like you, as the speaker of the comment, are responsible for the violence that ensues, right? So, like, if I call you a name and you punch me in the face, it was me who actually was to blame for that because I said a thing that is going to result in a punch in the face almost every time. Like, I should have known that I was going to get punched by saying that.
In modern days, I would say a good example would be the N word.
Sure. But legally speaking, right?
All right.
And I think the way our society kind of moves now, maybe we shun that type of language, right? But if person A says something nasty and person B responds in violence, I think we tend to put the blame legally on person B, right? It's kind of like that sticks and stones type mentality, right? Like
Are you supporting saying calling people the N-word? Is that what you're doing here,
that's
Mike?
that's exactly what they're trying to do, right? Um,
Right.
but yeah, I mean that's kind of how we I think move nowadays, right? Like
Right.
basically, you don't have an excuse to attack someone physically. You should never resort to violence, right?
Right.
Maybe sometimes we might be like, oh, okay, he said something so vile. I understand why he caught a beat down. But I think we also kind of also know that's really not going to fly, right? Like if this goes to court, the person
Right.
who threw the first punch is probably,
In
yeah,
public opinion, it might fly, but in court, it wouldn't.
yeah. But also, I think that's also a testament to where society is, right? I mean, I think it's kind of a complex issue, right? But because I think there will be people who will say, yeah, like that guy deserved to get his ass beat for what he said, but those same people might also acknowledge that that didn't mean that the person who pushed him had a right to, like, or he should have, right? Kind of
It depends. Some
like I
people would.
understand it, like I understand why that happened, but that's not really something that that's not really the response that technically should have happened. And if we go to court, I don't think most people would think it was right to blame the person who said the word versus who threw the punch.
I think it depends. If we're talking in the court of public opinion,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're talking a different situation. For example, I've seen there was a news article. I think it was about a father who ruthlessly beat down this guy who tried to sexually assault his daughter. And every comment in there, like of course the father was arrested for attempted murder or something like that. But every comment in there was like, yeah, I don't see crime here. I just see a father protecting his daughter as he should. And like everyone seemed to agree. There was no disagreement.
They didn't see a crime there. I mean, because I think two things can be true at the same time, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, no.
I
There's like
think
this is exactly what he should do. Like
okay.
this set this
See, I
man
think
free.
most
Protect this man
people
at all costs. That type of thing.
maybe there's some hyperbole in that though. Like I don't know.
Could be.
I seem to think that most people would see the complexity of an issue like that and
I don't think so.
they would say, sure, he committed a crime, but you know what? Good for him.
I don't think so. I think something like this, especially, I mean, it's a
Yeah.
little bit different, but an
Yeah.
emotionally charged, we're talking about someone trying to sexually assault your daughter. I
Okay.
think everyone will
Okay. Wait a minute.
identify with that and
Hold on a second.
say,
That's a little bit different though. So was the guy like in the process? Like he was like he stopped him from doing it type thing?
I don't know, I don't know if it was in the
Okay.
process. It might have happened after,
Yeah.
and then the father went and
Well,
hunted him down.
then
It's there's been numerous cases.
there are mitigating factors there, right? Because even if you were to kill someone in that situation, it would probably be a voluntary manslaughter as opposed to a murder. But this is not the situation we're talking about. We're talking about words, just pure words.
Right, right, right.
You know what I mean?
But
So
I'm just saying it
yeah.
depends, you know.
So picture this, right? Instead of trying to sexually assault anyone, someone called his daughter a nasty word, right?
Okay, let's say what if Ted Cruz went up and just punched Trump in the mouth for calling his wife ugly?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So I think honestly, I think most people would be able to see the complexity in that. I think they
I
would
don't think
say,
so.
"You don't
I
think
think most
so?"
people would say he deserve it.
Yes, I agree. He deserves it, and legally, Ted Cruz was in the wrong and committed a crime, and deserves, should be well, is expected to be punished. Whether they agree with that or not, like they would understand that that's kind of how the law works and how we operate as a
Yeah.
society.
Yeah, I don't think most people would see it that way. I
You
think
don't think
most
most people
people
would be like, "That's an assault," but he kind of got that assault, like he kind of deserved that assault too.
I don't think people would go with this the second part of it and think about it. But I'd be like, yeah, people would be like, I think most people would be like, yeah, he deserved that. And they wouldn't even contemplate the legal part of it afterwards. Of
So
course,
maybe
there's the
I'm thinking of
law.
it more
I
because
think
I'm a lawyer, but
I think so.
yeah.
I think most people would just like, well, hey, he deserved it, and then they'd keep it moving.
So
Like,
you think that most people think that fighting words is still a thing in that way, right? Like
I
that
think,
really that
I think so.
certain they think that there are certain words that if you say to
Absolutely.
somebody, you basically gave up your legal rights by saying them. right? Like
I think so.
you think that, if I said something nasty to you and you beat the crap out of me, like people would think, you know what, timid, Jay is immune from prosecution now, or from any kind
I
of
don't think people would think
repercussion.
about prosecution though. I think that's where the your
Mm.
lawyer connection has come in. I don't think people would think about prosecution. They would think the first part, like, oh well, he deserved it. He he should have got popped in the mouth. People are even saying today, like, this is the reason why we've got so much disrespect, because people aren't getting popped in the mouth anymore. Like, I think most people aren't thinking of the legal ramifications,
Right.
especially in those moments. They're thinking with the emotional.
Right.
Right.
Okay. But if you would ask
Yeah.
somebody, right, like, do you think that person committed an assault? Do you think that, legally they're in the wrong? What do you think they would say?
I'd say, I think most people would be like, maybe, but he deserved it. He had it
Okay.
coming.
Okay.
I think fighting words is
Yeah.
still within the people publicly. No,
Hmm.
it's not a legal defense, but
Yeah.
the people, I
Well,
think it's human
well,
nature and stuff.
let's get more to the point, because really, when they say fighting words are not protected, what they mean is that there could be laws stopping you from saying fighting words,
Right.
right? Now, how would you square that with our understanding of free speech today, right? Because we know that, for example, a hate crime by itself is protected. We've talked about, if you say a hate crime and you use that, as you're attacking someone for those same reasons, right? Then it becomes a hate crime, and that's not
Right.
protected. But if you just say hate speech, um, we know that that's protected by the First Amendment. So how would you
Right.
square that with the idea of fighting words not being protected? I mean, would there not be some overlap there, right? That certain things that you would say are protected as hate
Yeah.
speech would also be not protected as fighting words?
I think there is some overlap, and I think that's what's got the whole the kind of the hate speech thing on shaky ground to some degree, where there's a lot of room for debate and pushback on what determines it. How do you determine that this is hate speech? What situation is that hate speech? What situation would it be? This and that. So I
But
don't
hate
know if
speech is protected, though.
yeah, but what determines hate speech?
But do you have to make a determination if it's protected already? It's protected just like any other speeches. So why do we even have to classify it?
No, well, I guess, yeah, you're right. I'm thinking because there have been hate speech laws where it's made it, you know, there would be,
But that would
repercussions
be,
for hate.
but that would not just for speech though. That would be if you say something hateful, right, while you're committing a crime. So like if you use an ethnic slur while you attack someone, that could be
Right.
used as
Yeah.
evidence that you attacked them for racial reasons, and that
Or
could
a
be
hateful manner.
right, and then that could then elevate the crime to a hate crime. But if you just were to say the words, right, again, this goes back to the crux of the issue. As vile as we deem some of the speech to be, right, is protected by the First Amendment, right?
Right.
People want to use ethnic slurs, they want to have neo-Nazi marches, whatever. We can hate all that, and we should hate all that, but
Right.
the First Amendment allows it, right?
Sure.
So how does fighting words really play into that? I mean, for example, if you were to call someone a Nazi, someone like that's a fighting word. Just by saying that, I'm going to punch you out. But we just said that hate speech is protected. Is that not hate speech? I mean, why would that not be protected? So only the hate speech that doesn't incite violence.
Well,
Fight.
no, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think lawfully, yeah, I would imagine, if someone calls you that, it's still protected.
Now there are other
Your
exceptions to it.
response,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
this is a complicated issue, right? Because there are other exceptions to it. Like, for example, defamation is an exception to free
Sure.
speech, right? So, you know, if someone were to call me a Nazi and I can prove that that's factually not true and it's causing me damage,
Right.
right? Then it's no longer protected. Now there's a potential lawsuit there. So because
Right.
that's defamation of character, right? Or it could be, depending on how it's used and the circumstances. But
Right.
so there's that aspect of it that it isn't always protected if you can prove that it's factually not.
Right.
It's more than just a matter of opinion, right? Like calling someone ugly is always an opinion, but if there are factual aspects of it that are proven to be untrue, and damaging to your reputation, then
Well, I mean, listen,
out
she
of
could,
protected categories.
if she was only able to date Ted Cruz, then there may be factual basis for her not being attractive. I mean,
So moving on from that, uh,
so how would so
but
in
here's the other thing
bringing
I did want to kind of explain it because we talked about fighting words
right,
technically not being protected, and then I said, well, as a society, and I think even our legal system has kind of moved away from that. But if you really just want to simplify this, we said that inciting violence is not protected, and so that's really what fighting words are, right? They're words that incite violence. So, and I think that's why there's a societal component to it, because the question is, are these words that you're speaking of so incredibly vile that they automatically incite violence, right? So it isn't just that the person responded by hitting you, but by it's got to be objectively the case that basically your average reasonable person would have responded the same way. And so
right,
I think society's feeling on that becomes relevant to that extent, right? Because
right,
what we're saying is that you say a certain word and it's just so crazy, it's so bad that your average person is going to respond by punching you, right? But just because you said that the words or those words.
right,
And so I think that's why, while it's technically still a thing, right? Because again, the baseline here is that inciting violence is not protected. I think the real question is, are there any words that automatically incite violence, right? That the average person is going to respond with violence just by hearing those words. I think
yeah, I
that's
think
why I
there
think
are,
where society is becomes
yeah,
relevant, right? Because
right.
if we're in a place where the average person would not respond with violence, then you don't really have fighting words anymore.
Right. I think there are.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, inward comes to mind, absolutely. But I
No,
think in
though.
this
Yeah.
case,
But so here's the thing. Imagine this, just as a thought experiment. Imagine Congress were to pass a law saying that it's illegal to use the N-word.
right, I don't think that would go over well or that they should in that
That would not be
regard.
upheld constitutionally. I think
I don't think it would be upheld.
that would
Right.
almost certainly be deemed a violation of free speech.
But if you're talking about the measure of where generally people might respond with violence after being called that,
Mm-hmm.
I think it meets that criteria. I think that changes I think that could change how the case is prosecuted versus whether the law needs to be changed, right? I think that's something that you would talk about in the court case. If someone called me the N-word and I punched them in the mouth and then
Mm-hmm.
they sue me for assault, um, that would be something that would be discussed in the case and be like, well, this is what happened and this is why. And then the judge would have to make that determination. Well, yeah, listen, hey, listen, why would you do that? Why would you even call him
Mm-hmm.
that? You
Sure.
know, this is what happens in society, or that this is a very strong word with this history. And like, I think that's where the debate happens.
Right. So you're saying there would be legal relevance to that. Maybe it would be like a
Maybe.
mitigation.
I'm not saying
Right.
I'm saying maybe, but
Maybe.
that's where it would be decided
Right.
instead of the Supreme Court saying, well, this is a law, you can't,
Or Congress saying, but that's the
right.
thing. Like it becomes case by case. It becomes subjective, right? I don't think you could make a blanket statement that that's considered a fighting word because in Supreme Court jurisprudence, when it comes to the constitutionality of it, what you would be saying is the word is not protected, right? That it's not considered free speech. It's such, it incites violence just by its very utterance to the point where you could ban its utterance. And I
Right.
don't think that that's where we are as a
I think we
society.
are
You think so?
in
So
some places.
you think it rises to that level that the utterance of the word could be banned because just hearing it will just incite violence just by people hearing it.
I think in some situations, absolutely, it can be expected. We've seen, situation after situation where,
Well, but
and it's
that's
because it's
situations. There may be other factors there aside from just the mere utterance of the word.
sure, sure,
You know what I mean? And that's really what this is about. It's the
yeah.
mere
Now,
utterance, like the word itself, like just saying it is basically automatically going to result in violence.
right. I think there's possibility. I think the possibility is always there,
The
though.
possibility is there,
But
right? But
I
how
think to
likely
bring it
is it? Is it?
to
You know what I mean? Like I don't think that's where we are. I mean, look at not to take a right wing talking point, but hip hop, right? I mean,
Yeah, but it
you hear
depends
those
on
words
who's
all the
doing it.
time. But that's
Right.
again,
It
but
depends.
when you start getting into the context of it, I think it kind of removes it a little bit from the fighting words idea. The fighting words is kind of like it's basically always going to result in violence.
If a white person says it to a black person,
Mhm.
I think the percentage, the likelihood
Sure,
is high.
sure.
And of course, circumstances can change, right? It could be if it's already a tense situation, that could be the breaking point, right? It can, different situations call for different things.
Right, but
Um,
I think so. But I think the more situational you get, the more you kind of take it out of fighting words. Like I think now we're kind of
oh,
in a more evolved space, and I think this is kind of where we are now, even as a legal system, right? That you look at the circumstances of what happened in that case, and you don't just say the word itself needs to be banned because it's a fighting word. You know what I mean? Like it's more complex than that. I think, and I think the more you want to,
legally, I think
yeah,
it might
legally.
be.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, because the more you want, the more you try to police that, the more you infringe potentially on free speech, right?
right. So to bring this
Yeah.
connection to the topic here, do you think the somebody burning the flag will meet that criteria of fighting words that will incite, because this is trying to paint
Right.
it
Right.
as someone burning the American flag is going to incite people to violence.
Well, it says that it may, and that's why and we
But do
kind of
you
maybe we went off on a tangent with fighting words because it kind of uses fighting words as an aside. What it's saying is that
right,
yes, there are First Amendment protections, and yes, it's implicitly admitting that burning the flag has been considered protected by the First Amendment, right? But it's
right.
saying, in spite of that, there are exceptions to First Amendment protections. Not everything is protected by the First Amendment, and it uses inciting imminent lawless action and fighting words as examples of things that are not protected. So maybe it makes an implication there that this is like a fighting word, but it doesn't actually say that. What it's basically doing is saying, okay, there is wiggle room here, right? Like not
I think that's what they're
everything.
trying to do.
Yeah,
They want the wiggle room.
yeah,
And I think ultimately, I think what they're trying to do, as with a lot of the actions that he's taken, is they're trying to push these things to the Supreme Court to get them
mm-hmm.
to revisit these things because the Supreme Court is clearly biased at this moment in time. And I think if this were to go, say, for example, someone did burn a flag, they got arrested trying to be following this executive order, he'd lose in the lower courts, right? That person would not be held accountable for this in the lower courts because they would uphold the precedent, right? The Supreme Court precedent. If it was continued and pushed to the Supreme Court, there's a likelihood that this conservative majority would revisit those prior decisions and change that. And I think this is another one of those situations where they're trying to do that.
Right. So all of that we just discussed was section one, which was the which was the purpose, right? And
Right, right.
so that's kind of like the background. And
We got to work on time management sometimes.
no, this is good. This is all. I think it all spurs good discussion here. So, but I say that to say that the meat of it doesn't start really until section two. Section
Right.
one is just like they're laying out why they're doing this, and they're saying that there is some wiggle room here, and they want to restore respect and sanctity to the flag. Okay, but they're not really getting into the meat of what this executive order is doing, right? What is it empowering? How is it changing things or trying to uh, do something of substance? So
Right.
that's where section two comes in, and it's pretty short. I mean, we can go through it here. It says
That's
measures.
longer than
Say it again.
it's quite long because it's like section A, B,
Oh no,
C,
I was looking
D.
at section. I was looking at section A. We can look at the others more
Okay.
briefly, but section A is really, I think, the meat of the executive order of what is it saying that we're going to go after here, right? It says the
Right.
attorney general shall prioritize the enforcement to the fullest extent possible. So That's something I think of note. It's not saying that the law is changing or even really the policy so much is changing. It's just saying that they should prioritize these enforcements, right? The
Right.
enforcement
I've got a
of
yeah,
this.
I've got a question about that, but go continue.
Okay. So prioritize the enforcement to the fullest extent possible of our nation's criminal and civil laws against acts of American flag desecration that violate applicable content neutral laws. Now, that's a weird way of phrasing that. They've, okay, let's talk about a word salad.
Yeah,
Prioritize
yeah.
enforcement, prioritize the enforcement of our nation's criminal and civil laws against acts of desecration that violate applicable content neutral laws. Okay, I get it. I get it. So the content neutral laws are not the ones that are unconstitutional or anything. So it's saying that if you do if you burn the American flag in a way that violates these other laws, which they're saying are not content neutral, because again, the content neutral, what is that? That's part of the First Amendment framework here, right? That you can't go after speech in a way that discriminates against certain viewpoints, right? If you go
Right.
after expressive activity, it has to be done in a content neutral way, right? In other words, not favoring one side of your speech or another, but it's really more so your activity that may be connected to the speech, but isn't you're not being prosecuted for the speech, right? So they put that in there to make clear that they're not trying to run afoul of First Amendment protections here. They're saying that if you burn the flag, but it's not just burning the flag, it's if you do it in connection with other content neutral laws, right? Such as, and this is where it goes, while causing harm unrelated to expression consistent with the First Amendment, such as violent crimes, hate crimes, illegal discrimination against American citizens, other violations of civil rights, crimes against property and the peace, conspiracies and attempts to violate, aid, and abet others breaking laws. Okay, so this is why I started off by saying this executive order doesn't really do anything because
Right.
it's saying, it's not saying that we'll go after you for burning the flag or desecrating the flag. It's saying if you do that and you also break laws in a content neutral way while you
Right.
do it, such as basically any other crime, right? Well, we'll go after you for those other crimes. Now, this may be the question, and this may be the subject of the litigation here. Prioritize the enforcement to the fullest extent possible of
I have a question about that part, but yeah, go ahead.
acts of, well, that's what we're getting into now, right? Acts of desecrating the American flag that violate those other laws. And so what they're saying is there is basis to prosecute for breaking other laws, but they're going to prioritize enforcement against people who break these other laws in connection with doing something that is constitutionally protected in the first place. And I think
Right. So
that's why it becomes contentious from a constitutional standpoint.
right. So I think there's a couple of things that they're trying to do here. I think the overall thing is actually very much the fascist authoritarian type of
Mhm.
angle where it's trying to quell acts of protest and dissent, right?
And
So
that's what's known as a chilling effect in First Amendment law.
so that's exactly what this is about. This is
Yeah.
really not about the flag, so to speak. This is about, there's going to be for other things that they're going to do and things they're already doing. There's already protests, there's marches, there's dissent, and this is to try to curb that type of thing. Next, I think I'm wondering, you mentioned this is it sounds like a word salad, and I think it sounds like that it really is. It's just like strong posturing language,
Mhm.
because to me, um, this part that says the Attorney General shall prioritize the enforcement to the fullest extent possible of our nation's criminal and civil
Okay.
laws. However, if burning the flag is constitutionally protected and there is no law broken, there
Right.
is no full extent of the law to be able to
Right.
prosecute.
The
There's
fullest
really
extent
nothing.
possible is zero.
It's
Well,
zero.
well, no, but here's the thing. There may be a legitimate criminal enforcement of someone who does this in connection with breaking other laws, as there always was.
Right.
But here's where why I
I
think
think it gets into that in the B, in the section B. I think it gets into that because it mentions
disorderly
break
conduct,
violating
destruction of property.
burning restrictions, disorderly
Right.
conduct laws of like if you set fire to a flag in the middle of the street, you may
Yeah.
not be prosecuted for burning the flag, but you're prosecuted for sort of setting a
Setting a
public
fire in the middle of
fire.
the street.
And
Yes.
yeah,
But here's the thing, though. It may be kind of hard to parse because of the way it's written, but
right,
yes, it is true that there may be a legitimate prosecution for doing these other things. However, when you start talking about prioritize the enforcement to the fullest extent possible, which may be zero, right? But prioritize the enforcement of acts against the American flag that also violate these other laws. Now, hold on a second. We have to take our feelings and our politics out of this. If we are starting off with the notion that burning the flag is free speech in itself, right? Taking out the other activities that may not be lawful, but just the act of burning the flag, right? If that is free speech, we have to put that in the category of free speech the same way we would put anything else. So let's, for a minute now, substitute the American flag burning with any other form of protected speech, right? Let's say, I don't know, speaking out against a certain political party, right? Let's just say, they said instead of American flag desecration, let's say they wrote this as the Attorney General shall prioritize the enforcement to the fullest extent possible of our nation's criminal and civil laws against speaking out against the Republican Party in a way that violates applicable content neutral laws while causing harm to the unrelated to the expression consistent with the First Amendment that may include violent crimes, hate crimes, discrimination, blah, blah, blah. What they're saying is that people who commit these other crimes are going to be prosecuted with more vigor, right? Or with a greater level of enforcement, greater level of priority, at least, if they hold certain viewpoints or they say certain things or do certain things that are protected by the First Amendment.
right,
So that's where it becomes unconstitutional, I think.
right. Using this as a means to ramp up prosecution of those other parts when it's not warranted on their own.
Right, right. So if you want to think of it like this, let's say there are two groups of people in the street, right? They're both setting fire. They're both burning down property. They're both
Right,
breaking all kinds of other laws, even, right?
right,
They're both doing things that surely are uh, reasons for them to be arrested and prosecuted. All right. One of these two groups, though, is burning flags. The other
right,
group isn't burning flags, but they're burning everything else to the ground.
right,
Under this, it's saying the attorney general should prioritize the enforcement of the group that's burning the flags over
right,
the group that's not burning the flags, when really they all should be on the same level of enforcement because they've committed the same crimes. We said
right,
the flag burning itself is not unlawful. That's protected by the First Amendment, in fact, right? So
right,
how is it protected behavior, protected expressive activity, if you're saying that those people who do that are going to be subject to greater enforcement than others?
right, right. So yeah, I think here's another thing that's also like a kind of a gotcha thing with this. Whereas we mentioned that Democrats coming out to push back against this kind of put themselves, or
Mm-hmm.
anyone can kind of be framed as pro flag burning, anti-US because of the way it's framed. Um, I think that also sets up anyone protesting this sort of activity. Say, for example, he puts this out, and then people across the country start saying, we've got the constitutional protection here, and then they burn flags
Right.
as evidence of it, and we're seeing this protest against this being carried out in burning flags. even if those people can't be held liable, the administration can use that
Sure.
imagery to say, see, look at them. They've gone wild. They hate the country. Look what they're doing. Because, like, what is it? The Texas versus Johnson, which is one of the cases cited there,
Mhm.
is basically that, right? It was Johnson burning the flag to protest Reagan's policies as a demonstration,
Yeah.
right? So if people start to demonstrate in that manner to protest this, then he's got more fuel for, his, oh, look, they're anti-American type of rhetoric.
Right. Right. No, exactly. This is why politically it may work out well for him. But like you said, it is dangerous, right? Anytime that you're
Yeah.
stamping on the Constitution, you're in dangerous territory. But it's funny when it says, the Attorney General shall prioritize the enforcement to the fullest extent possible. Well, any attorney general who is versed in the Constitution is going to read that as uh, the fullest extent possible is no more priority than I would give it now, which is if you commit a crime, we're going
Right.
to go after you. But flag burning is in itself protected, and so we can't give it greater enforcement. And so, all right, I'm reading this, I'm following this exactly as you wrote it. I shall prioritize this to the fullest extent possible, which happens to be no more than it already is before you wrote this.
Right. But I
Right.
think I think this is also a symbolic win for for his supporters because they won't know that,
Right.
right? They're gonna stand there and say, "Well, see, look, he's supporting America. He's putting America first. Look, he made this strongly worded thing here, and we don't know that, the strongest extent is zero, but he's took a stand, and we're behind that. And I think
Well, it's
he
also
might,
dangerous. Yes, it's also dangerous because the attorney general is probably not going to read it that way. Because he's going to be or she's going to be directed to read it
right,
in a way that furthers the agenda here, which probably is going to
right,
be uh,
yeah,
prioritize one group, right? One
yeah,
group engaging in speech over another group engaging in speech, right? You're going to
right,
go after the group engaging in speech we don't like, that we
right,
deem to be undesirable. And
absolutely,
that's, the application of that is what could end up becoming the basis of a Supreme Court case.
all
I
right,
hope not. I hope it doesn't even go that far, right? I mean, there's a
right,
chilling aspect of it as well, which you've touched on a lot here. That there are people who can be like, "Listen, this just is an attempt to crack down on protesting," and
absolutely,
in that regard, it should be challenged before it even gets to the point of certain people being prosecuted over others based on their expressive activities. It shouldn't, hopefully, it doesn't even
right,
go that far before it's challenged and gets knocked down. But as we know, things take a long time, especially when you're talking about civil cases or appealing to the Supreme Court. Things take years. So
right. I think there are two things to consider here too. Like, um, just like you said, the attorney generals are probably some of them, not all, some of them are probably not going to read it that other way. They're going to try to attempt to further this agenda, because there are going to be some who are,
they'll
biased or
be
whatever.
fired. I mean, let's be honest, right? They'll be fired if they don't fall in line with the agenda. We've seen that time and time again.
Yeah, right. And so what that does, what makes it, not only does it violate the Constitution, um, and harm, the people and their civil rights, but it also puts the burden of the defense on the person that is being prosecuted under this. Because now they've got to get in court and argue that their actions don't violate the law, right? That they are in line with First Amendment free speech. Whereas they might not have to do that before because the attorney general wouldn't have gone after them over this because they would have just said, hey, this is free
Mhm.
speech.
Right.
Now they're put in the hot seat. Anyone who does it is ri at risk of that hot seat.
Yeah.
And the next issue is that you mentioned, like, like we mentioned, they could be hoping for this to go up to the Supreme Court. We have to remember that each of the cases that kind of set that precedent for this to be a free speech protected activity only passed 5-4.
Yeah.
It didn't pass
Different. It's a
unanimously.
different court now.
It's a different court now where that four is got the majority.
And this is why it depends on Well, I think the strength of the case here depends on what happens, right? The example that I gave, you've got two groups of people, right? One's burning the flag, one isn't, but they're otherwise doing the same exact things. If one group is prosecuted to a greater extent, right, or their prosecution was shown to be prioritized by the attorney general, right, in that case, that's a stronger case, I think, going to the Supreme Court and holding this executive order to be unconstitutional or arguing that it should be held unconstitutional because now you've shown that you engaged in constitutionally protected speech, but you were punished by the government
Uh-huh.
not for your other actions that were not lawful, but you were punished in terms of the priorities being greater against you, right?
Mhm.
Based on the content of your speech. I mean, that's a
Uh,
clearer, I think, case to make, even with the more conservative majority. Doesn't mean that they're going to win that necessarily, but it's a better case, I think, to make than preemptively suing, right? Like if someone were to just sue now and say they want to do a demonstration, but they're afraid, right? This is preventing them from doing it or whatever. I think that gives the Supreme Court more wiggle room to uphold the executive order and say, listen, the attorney general shall prioritize to the fullest extent possible. That's fine. Why can't they prioritize to the fullest extent possible? This doesn't specify what that extent is. So
right.
what is your beef? You know what I mean? It
Right.
it lets them play with the words more as opposed to something happening that already infringed on their rights clearly.
Right. Um, I don't even know if I don't think the Supreme Court, the present Supreme Court, because it's clearly more conservative than it would have been in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Um, would they even need to make some sort of wiggle room justification? I mean, I guess they kind of do, but they can still just kind of push it through because they have such a huge
They
majority.
could,
I
they
mean,
could,
they've done it, made
but let's be clear.
shaky
I mean,
grounds
yes,
statement.
I agree. But there still have been cases where they went against the current administration. Maybe some people were surprised. They were like, "Whoa, I can't believe they ruled that way." But the stronger a case that you have, I think, constitutionally speaking, the better off you should be. Doesn't mean again, doesn't mean that you're going to win. Doesn't mean that they're going to follow the Constitution even. But if I'm bringing this case, I would rather have a clear cut constitutional violation, right? Where it's like, listen,
Right,
Group A and Group B did the same illegal things, but you went after Group A more harshly because they engaged in speech that you didn't like. Whoa,
right,
that's what I mean. That's like that really cuts deep, I think, at the heart of the Constitution, as opposed to just this as it's written, which is kind of written in kind of like a vague sort of way that enables them or gives them more room, I think, to play with the words, right? To the fullest
right,
extent possible. Well, what does that mean? What if the fullest extent possible is no more than it was prior to you writing this? So, okay,
right,
what's the problem? The fullest extent possible, sure. Whatever you say, it's still nothing, but it's the fullest extent possible. You know what I mean? That the argument here is going to be that it has a chilling effect, right? That's the
right,
constitutional danger here prior to it actually being enforced in a discriminatory
right,
way, right? But
right,
if it's enforced in a discriminatory way against a certain group of people, well, now you have the chilling effect and you have the discrimination against someone's constitutionally protected speech that already
right.
took place. Whereas if you just read this now, it's like, yeah, they can prosecute you for doing these other crimes, which were already crimes before this happened. So nothing has really changed, you know.
Right, right. I
Uh,
think I mean, we've got two more sections on
yeah.
here. Three is quite short, but four might deserve a little bit of attention
Well, hold
because,
on a second, because we just looked at 2A. So you're talking about
all right,
B.
right.
Okay.
All right, so B was what we kind of talked about B because it's basically like you said, they're trying to tie it to things
Right.
that are already illegal, such as open burning
Right.
restrictions,
Right.
disorderly conduct laws, all right, and they're going to try to apply uh, harsher punishments if they're using that. So I guess we kind of covered that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
Um,
C, to the maximum extent permitted by the Constitution. What if the maximum extent is zero? All right. Does that
right,
just nullify this whole thing? The Attorney General shall vigorously prosecute those who violate our laws in ways that involve desecrating the flag and may pursue litigation to clarify the scope of the First Amendment exceptions in this area.
Right. So it means that in the case, they're going to, I guess, try to wiggle around that, or
But see, this may be, I don't know if these lawyers were thinking the way that I'm thinking here, but they may have been. Maybe what they're trying to do is be proactive and say, before someone can sue the Supreme Court, sue the government and take it to the Supreme Court or take it to the higher courts in a way that makes us look bad, right? That clearly is in violation of their free speech rights.
we're going to come after them.
Why don't we preemptively strike, right? We should sue to clarify
Right.
the scope of what we're allowed to do and maybe get ahead of the issue legally.
Right. I mean, and think about like who would they sue in that case? Would it be the flag burner?
But there is no flag burner yet necessarily.
But I mean, if that's the case,
I think,
right?
yeah, it depends, right? You
Right.
need someone to be able to sue. It may end up being suing local governments or states, maybe with
Right.
legislation that push back against this or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so again, that's dangerous in itself because that's basically threatening
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
anyone who would oppose this type of thing here.
All right. And then it talks about let's see, the Secretary of State, the AG, Secretary of Homeland Security, acting within their respective authorities. See, it's got to always put that in there because, again, what if they don't have the authority to do this, right?
Right.
But within their authorities, shall deny, prohibit, terminate, or revoke visas, residence permits, naturalization proceedings, and other immigration benefits, or seek
Right.
removal from the U.S. whenever there has been an appropriate determination that foreign nationals have engaged in American flag desecration activity under circumstances that permit the exercise of such remedies.
Yeah. Word salad.
So, yeah. So, hold on a second. Does this even talk about prioritizing like the other one did? Because the prioritizing, I think, elevated the constitutional scrutiny because that is changing policy, right? In a certain respect, changing the way the government is behaving, at least. But here, well, it says shall, okay. It doesn't say may, it says they shall do it, but it says whenever they're permitted to do it by federal law.
right.
So, okay. I
Well,
guess
it's
you
within their
could read
respective
that
authorities.
within their authorities, but the word shall is in there. I think that's what makes
This
it,
directive. Yeah.
yeah, a directive, right? So that you could challenge in terms of trying to change the policy here. There,
Basically, any
yeah.
any immigrants or anyone coming to the country or here, if it's possible for the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security to deny their visas, remove them from the country, anything like that, then they should do that.
They
Then they're
must do it.
directed, they must do
They
that.
must do it
If
now.
if they're
Right.
found that they have done some flag burning at some point.
And right. And it's determined that they're allowed to do it. In other words, that the officials are allowed to pursue these remedies, right?
Right.
If the officials are permitted under federal law to deny the visas and to,
Right. If you can do it.
if you're allowed to do it, is what it's saying.
Yeah,
But
basically.
again, it's making the basis of this constitutionally protected activity. That's the problem with this, right? Um,
Mm.
Again, I know flag burning is obviously an emotional subject, right? It's one of those lightning rod subjects that people are going to respond
That's my
in a
question too.
visceral way. But for the sake of analyzing whether it's lawful, it may be helpful to replace that with something else. Because if we can agree that,
Well, don't help them strengthen their case.
no, I'm not. That's the opposite. What I'm saying is this may be a helpful way of understanding why this is unconstitutional.
Right.
Because if you were to replace American flag desecration with any other constitutionally protected speech, right? You
Right.
probably see this better. Like take that out, replace it. We just use the example of talking smack about a political party, but it could be literally any kind of protected speech. What if it's something like, saying you like chocolate ice cream better than vanilla ice cream? Sounds
Yeah.
stupid, but these are just examples of things you're allowed to say, right?
Sure.
Constitutionally protected speech. So imagine if this was the clause here, these federal officials shall deny, prohibit, terminate, revoke visas, permits, naturalization proceedings, other immigration benefits, and seek removal from the U.S. whenever there has been an appropriate determination that foreign nationals have engaged in preferring chocolate ice cream over vanilla ice cream under circumstances that permit the exercise of such remedies pursuant to federal law. Well, first of all, there really are no circumstances that would permit that, unless you're taking the speech aspect out of it completely and just talking about the illegal behaviors. But to
Right.
say that people who have this opinion or make this statement that we agree is protected by the First Amendment should
Right.
should suffer greater consequences or should be
Right.
treated more harshly by the officials.
Right.
It's not saying that people who don't engage in flag burning should be subject to the same scrutiny, right? It's saying people who do this, who do
Right.
this constitution protected thing, even with other circumstances present that may be unlawful, which we acknowledge, but they're using that to say that there's some kind of priority, some kind of higher priority given to people who engage in this type of speech. That's not
Well,
content neutral. That's not, you know what I mean? That is a clear violation of the First Amendment.
I wonder though. I think this would also be challenged or by them if, see, this is referring to not to citizens. This is referring
Right.
to
Foreign nationals.
foreign nationals. Um, and so the question would be, does the First Amendment apply to them?
It
Now,
does. It does.
before
However,
we
you're
would have,
getting at something. Yes.
right, I would say up until now, we've all gone under the assumption that yes, it would, but there's been challenges to that with this administration,
I mean,
right?
it's not only that though. So this is written in a very broad way, right? Because it talks about all kinds of things here. It isn't just
Right.
stopping people from coming in who are applying to come in, right? People applying for a visa. It's talking about terminating visas, residence permits, naturalization, all immigration benefits. It's very broadly written.
Right. It's everything. Like
Everything,
all
right?
you
It's
foreign
basically
people.
saying, yeah, whatever you can do to mess with someone who is a foreign national and is engaging in this kind of behavior, do it, right?
Right.
But here's the thing. There is so yes, clearly the First Amendment does apply to everyone. If you read it, it isn't just citizens, right? It's everyone here. But there are certain circumstances where your speech would become the basis of whether you're allowed in the country, for example, right?
Sure.
Like if you come in, you want to come in and you get interviewed, and you start saying things like, I don't know, calling yourself an enemy of the country, and you have plans to, even if you don't directly say you're gonna cause violence, right? Certain things that you say that could be red
Sure.
flags could prevent you lawfully from being allowed entry into the country, right?
Right.
So I think that's where they have some kind of maneuverability here, but this is written in such a broad way.
Right.
But then again, it does have that clause that says, to the extent possible, right? To the
Right.
extent that you're allowed to do it, do it. So it's not even
Right.
saying what they're allowed to do. It's just saying like do as much as you can.
Yeah. Whatever you can do, do
Whatever
all that.
whatever you could do, go for it. But
Yeah.
but
Do go.
it isn't permissive though. This is the important part. It says shall. It doesn't say may. It says
Right.
shall.
You
So
have to.
it is saying that you're subjecting people who engage in this type of behavior, which is protected by the First Amendment, to higher scrutiny, and that's where it becomes problematic from a First Amendment perspective.
So let me ask you this though. What if in this hypothetical, this foreign national was, maybe, protesting activists, whatever, in their country, and they burned the American flag over there because they were
Mm-hmm.
protesting maybe some activity America was involved in. Not because they hated the country, but they were
Right.
protesting this thing. And then they were later on, trying to, immigrate into the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Now, would the First Amendment protection of flag burning apply to them, even though they weren't in the country? Because
No.
that means, right. So in that case, under this, then they would be
Well,
denied.
so right. So it would apply to them to the extent you wouldn't be allowed to imprison someone, for example, for engaging in that activity, even if it was done in another country.
Right.
Right? Like, could you imagine that? Like passing a law that says that anyone who burned the flag in a different
Around the
country
world.
around the world would be subject to 90 days or more, whatever,
Right.
behind bars in the U.S. upon arrival here. That would not fly. But that type of behavior could be relevant in determining whether someone should be allowed entry into the country.
And that's what this seems to
Yeah.
say.
But it goes
Um,
beyond that, though, because it's
but
talking about
right,
immigration benefits being revoked, naturalization proceedings. So it could be people who were here for a long time trying to become citizens. I mean, this is written in a very broad way.
right. So it gets everyone because the
Yeah.
beginning part deny, prohibit, or terminate uh, visas. So this deny and prohibit could be people who've just never even stepped foot in here, so they're not allowed to come in. Terminate, revoke visas, permits, naturalization. Those are people who have already been here and already in the system. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's everyone, anyone. They're trying to get anyone.
Right.
Um,
But then
so
you see
yeah,
the severability clause, which is very common, right? You see this all the time when even laws are passed, right? I will see it in legislature all the time. It says if any provision of this order is held to be invalid, the remainder is not affected. So
right.
they're saying, listen, we kind of went ham. We went crazy when we wrote this. Maybe some of this will be struck down, but we're saying just because you strike down some parts of it doesn't mean the rest should automatically fall.
Right, right. So yeah. All right. So then on to the last part, section
Mm-hmm.
4, and these are the general provisions. Now, this seems to be maybe I'm incorrect to try to is this protection for the administration itself or the agencies?
Which part are you looking at?
Section 4?
Okay, nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect, and then it lists certain powers here, right?
All right.
The authority granted by law to an executive department or agency, the functions of the director of the Office of Management and Budget. Okay. Oh, then it says this order shall. Oh, okay, that's different. Okay, so it's just nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise infect the authority granted by law to an executive department or agency or the functions of the director of the Office of Management and Budget relating to the budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. I think they're trying to protect themselves from these other
Right.
officials coming in and saying that this is preventing them from doing their jobs properly.
Right. I think like the one that I think it seems like would be is just saying like, they must follow existing laws basically, right?
Just,
Um
well, we're looking at A.
okay,
Yeah.
it doesn't override any current authority, right?
Yeah. So yeah,
So
so the director of the
again,
Office of Management and Budget relating to budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. Yeah, they probably don't want pushback saying that this is illegally affecting the passage of the budget or something like that, right? Like it's like we don't have money to allocate to this, or you're putting extra strains on us that we can't afford. It's saying we're not trying to step on your toes.
right. Okay, and then let's see. I don't relate to budgetary
This order
admin.
shall be implemented consistent with applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations. Again,
Right. So
subject to the availability of appropriations. So it's like saying if they don't want someone to come back and say there's no money to fund this,
right. Um
because that
and
could be a
again, if
constitutional
consistent
that could
with
be a constitutional
applicable
question, right? If it's argued that the president is making policy that requires
extra funding or something.
funding, right? They're saying, well, listen, Congress has to appropriate the funds. The president can't appropriate funds. So
Right.
it's a way of saying, listen, we're not trying to get involved in the money. It's a way of trying to protect themselves lawfully.
Right. But this also says it shall be implemented consistent with applicable law. But if applicable law says it's not against the law, then there's really nothing that this
Right.
order could be
Right.
implemented on.
Yeah. That's something a lawyer would probably put in every executive order, I'm guessing, just to try to be like a catch-all, right? Like we're not saying break
Right.
the law. We're saying that, this should be consistent with the law. But okay, what if it's not? You could say it's consistent with applicable law, but applicable law says that the government has to be content neutral.
Right.
And this is clearly not content neutral if it's directing the government officials to scrutinize people who have engaged in certain expressive activities more than people who haven't.
Right. So, all right. So, and then C was the one that seemed like it gives tries to shield the administration from being sued.
This order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law, or an equity by any party against the United States, its departments, agencies, or entities, its officers, employees, or agents, or any other person. Yeah.
So like you can't come back at us for this.
Well, kinda. I mean, it's not, that doesn't exactly mean that, but it means that it's not creating a claim, right?
Right,
So, certain laws are written to give people the ability to sue under those laws, right?
right,
I don't know, like the Fair Housing Act or something like that, right?
right.
So, like, this is a violation of that. We're bringing a lawsuit pursuant to this. They're saying that they're not intending to create a legal claim against them by making this order. Probably something that would appear in all the executive orders, I'm guessing.
I would imagine. The
Yeah.
last one's kind of funny to me. I mean, it's just kind of it's thrown in there, but I don't know. In my head, it just like I just imagine like the Department of Justice like reading through this and be like, "Hey, wait a minute. What, how'd I catch a stray? Why do I got to pay for this?
The cost for publication of this order shall be borne by the Department of Justice. And
Why
again,
do I got to pay for
yeah,
this? What did I do?"
but I think because that's an executive department, right?
Right,
Falls under the executive branch. I think what they're trying to say is that we're not expecting Congress to have to allocate money to pay for this. This is coming out of our
right.
budget, kind of.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
trying to prevent the lawsuits by saying it's unconstitutional because it's illegally allocating money from the through Congress or whatever, appropriating Congress's job.
Right. So, so yeah, so here we are. This is where we're at today and this ridiculousness. So overall, how do you think this is going to play out?
I think
'Cause
I don't think this is going to make much of a difference in the long run. I think it's something that is fodder for discussion this week, and I think
Mm.
maybe there'll be some litigation that finds its way to the Supreme Court in like 3 or 4 years or something, right? But I think it's just something to rile people up, and next week there'll be something else. You know what I mean? Like I don't think this is going to have long term reach in terms of the consciousness of the country. I think we'll be on to something else pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think so. Although there's also the side that says this is just a small cog in a much bigger
Sure.
strategy, right? For example, when some of these much more unpopular decisions that he may come out with are rolled out and people start to protest and there's dissents, there's these things that are rising up. It's laying this groundwork in little bits that has this strong language in it to either deter that sort of action or to try to give a basis for retaliation. Um,
Yeah,
it's
no,
just
I
rolled
think you're
out
right.
in
Right. I
little
think
bits.
taken by itself, it may not end up being too significant, but
Right.
it's another example or another step in that direction of
Right.
authoritarianism, like you pointed out before, fascism, right? And I think
Absolutely.
to that end, it is very dangerous.
Right. And I think what the danger, even more the danger, not just that it's executed like this, but the danger is when it's focused on as the hot button issue of the moment that's going to fly for a week until the next one without being attributed to the much larger picture, right? If we're focused
Mhm.
on every little bit
Right. Right.
as its own,
Right.
we're missing the culmination of it all. And if it's not being reported in that way, some of this could slip by. This full strategy could slip by, and it'll be too late when we realize it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my concern with it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I'm still thinking from a legal perspective, like clearly lawyers wrote that in a very
Sure,
careful kind of way to try to dance around the First Amendment protections. But we just parsed
sure.
it, I think, very carefully, and we saw that okay, it does attempt to be lawful, right? It does attempt to be constitutional, but at
Right.
the end of the day, when it's saying we're prioritizing enforcement against people who engage in this kind of speech that is protected, even if we don't like it, well, I don't know how you can justify that as being constitutional.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like saying it has all these clauses in there that are supposed to make it pass muster, like to the extent possible, and if it's a violation of other laws which are content neutral, and should not exceed the authority that they have. And okay, so it sounds like they're trying to keep it within the framework here, right? They're trying to call it within the lines, but
Right.
at the end of the day, they're saying we're gonna come down harder on people who break laws but engage in this type of speech than people who break laws and don't engage in this type of speech. And so that is the government no longer being content neutral, right?
Right. And it's a slow, steady march towards breaking that idea.
Yeah, like it's not a new law. It's, you know what I mean? It's not creating new penalties or anything. So it tries to like look innocent by saying, no, we're just saying do what you're allowed to do. But it is changing the policy in a sense, right? And saying we're going to be harsher on these folks. So that
Yeah.
is the government effectively punishing you for your speech, is it not?
Right. And you mentioned like, this is probably carefully written by lawyers, and it absolutely was, definitely was. Um, I think looking at the bigger picture, people raised red flags regarding this far right wing, far right conservative ideology that was coming with Trump, with the Project 2025 sort of plans that we're seeing being marched out in place. There is definitely an army of lawyers and strategists who have been making this plan for decades. Like it's not Trump didn't just sit down, Friday afternoon and say, "Okay, let's write this up." Like this has been a plan in place. There's someone has planned to put this together like this.
So you're trying to say that you support flag burning, bro?
Yeah, I do.
Whoa.
Yeah, I support it. It's free speech.
You
I'm not riled up. I come from a military family
yeah.
and going all the way back into like, the Revolutionary War, Um, if someone burns the American flag, it's not fighting words for me.
To you. Okay.
Right. It's not, I don't see it as fighting words, right? Not that I don't support the country or whatever, but I
Yeah.
don't see it as fighting. It's free speech. Like, okay, you can do that, whatever. Like, what does that
All right,
gain you?
yeah. So, I mean, so to clarify, you mean that you support people's right to do it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Well, let's put the poll out to the people because I know we went long on this and we want
Yeah,
the
we went very
poll.
long. We got to work in some time
Some
management
time
here.
management. Yeah. All right. So the poll question of the week is: do you agree with the executive order aimed at flag burning?
All right.
So
So
we had a poll from last week. Let's quickly go over it and then get out of here.
let's quickly go there. So last week we were kind of recapping the Jubilee video with Amanda Seals in that surrounded format where she was debating 20 black conservatives, and it was obvious that they were all on very different pages. And so the question that we put forth was, is having discussions with people with diametrically opposed views ever productive? And so 77% said no, 23%
Whoa.
said yes.
That is pretty striking.
That's a lot. That's a
And that's,
lot.
yeah, that shows you where we are, I think, right now, right? That,
Right.
what is it, three quarters about of the people?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Quarters,
more than three quarters
more than
actually.
three quarters
77.
are saying it's never productive to have discussions with people with different viewpoints, or at least diametrically
Right.
opposed viewpoints. But see, I want to relate that to the discussion that we just had in terms of fighting words, right? Because we said that
Right.
really the concept there is that society doesn't abide them, right? Like the very words are so vile, so reprehensible, so inciting violence that just saying them would make the average person respond that way, respond violently, right?
Yeah.
Uh, how can we even have a concept like that when we are so polarized as a society, right? Because
Right.
people won't even talk to people who aren't in their own bubbles. So, what words are there? What sentences are there out there that your average reasonable person are going to respond to violently? It seemed to me like it just depends on who you're talking to all the time.
Right. Um, well, one of the comments here in support of that 77% says, no, it's not productive. These aren't people with differences. These are people diametrically opposed to you. It's a waste of time, and there are far better uses of your time. And then they go on to say, our job is to mobilize, motivate, and outvote them, even with our increasingly crooked system. And then once we're in power, our job is not to talk to them, it's to dilute their power and the big money dollars that's backing them, to hobble and destroy this ecosystem that parrots disinformation and creates this new false reality. And they said that all this can be done by increasing democracy, limiting the dark money, and moving aggressively fast on a number of different fronts. You steamroll this type of opposition, you don't listen to them. No more listening to authoritarians.
That sounds kind of authoritarian, though.
I don't know. I kind of like it though. I mean, I think listen, we've just had a big free speech discussion.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we've watched over the last, more intensely in the last 10, 15 years, but over the last 20, 30 years, where outlets like a Fox News has increasingly spewed disinformation, and they're a mainstream news article. They're basically what we used to call the Inquirer, like one of those
Right.
tabloids. And there's been lawsuits to that case. They've had to pay hundreds, multi-millions in restitute or fees because they've misled people. They've agreed to that they've done it, and
Yeah.
it keeps going on. And so I know we have free speech and in a free society. At that level, is that something that should not some action be taken? Like, and because this is where we're at now with it. They've created
But we
false
did just have
realities.
okay, but we did just have a big free speech discussion,
That's what I'm saying. Like
and
it's,
we said how bad it was that they're going against free speech, right? And
but
they're
is this not inciting violence? Their free speech that they're executing. We've seen it.
say it again. If it's
If
not inciting violence,
are they not
or are
inciting
they not
violence?
inciting violence? Uh,
Fox News is been
nah,
spreading
see,
major disinformation that has
yes,
divided the
I
country, and
agree.
they're purposefully doing so.
I agree. But inciting
And they
violence, though, is imminent lawless action. This is why I'd say it depends on where we are as a society, and I guess
tell me
according
the
to this
people in
poll,
Charlottesville.
society's
T-
moving to this direction in this direction,
Tell
right?
me the people in Charlottesville weren't Fox News watchers. I mean, this is how they're being
That
informed. This is how they're being
right.
riled up.
But
Is
an
there not an argument there at
imminent
least?
lawless action is a standard, though. So it isn't like being indoctrinated. That's not the standard. It's imminent lawless action. So it's like you hear something and you immediately go out and do it by virtue. They've heard it. All that stuff they were saying, they heard it for a long time. It wasn't like they just heard it for the first time
They're
and was
being
like, let's go
groomed.
out. Say anything?
They're being groomed.
Yes. Yeah, they're being indoctrinated.
All right,
Is that
is there not a discussion to be had there at least, if not to say, take an immediate action? Is there at least not a discussion to be had there to say this is detrimental to the country?
sure?
This is clearly an aggressive action toward the country. We
Sure.
need to do something. They can't just
Sure.
allow this.
No, I agree with that, but I think we have to make a distinction between what we do, how we respond politically, right? Or as a
Sure,
country, as a people, as a
sure, sure,
society, or even individually, and what the law is, right? Free speech is a legal doctrine.
sure.
So, right. And so, the remedy could be turn that trash off. That doesn't mean you have to go to court and stop people from
They're the most watched trash in this country.
well, people are obviously consuming it willfully, though.
Right, right. So I wonder, maybe it's not a free speech sort of angle. Maybe it's the FTC
Mhm.
should go after them and say, listen, we're going to revoke your broadcast license
Well, yeah,
because this is
yes.
violation.
Yes, and that's what it is. And you have to be careful with that, right? Because we talked about free speech is not unlimited. There are
Right.
limitations, and that's what this executive order that we just covered, was trying to
Right.
get to, right? It was trying to test where the limitations were and maybe poke holes in where it could. So yeah, when it comes to, for example, defamation, right?
Yeah.
That isn't protected. So
Right. They
I
should be held at,
absolutely agree that yeah, that should be cracked down on. That that kind of stuff
yeah.
should be prevented.
I don't think they're held accountable at every instance like they could be, and
Mm-hmm.
that allows it to proliferate and go further.
But
Um,
how does that really relate to never having discussions with people who disagree with you?
yeah, that I don't know. I'm just saying as far as how it's creating this new false reality that's it's disinformation. It's this media ecosystem that's happening here. Now it's not about as far as people one on one,
Yeah,
but it's just a danger to the system in that regard.
right. You're saying it's a major culprit for why we are where we are.
It's definitely a contributor. I mean, it pushed on something that already existed. At least, say that. But yeah, so um, but yeah, here
Listen,
we are with
let's
this.
not forget though. Let's just not forget the fundamental tenet here that free speech means people are allowed to say things that
Yes,
we hate, right, and we strongly disagree with, and we think is wrong
right.
and vile and
Yes,
reprehensible. That's what free speech is, and so you can't have that one way, right? That works for everyone.
right. Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Another comment here says it's always productive to talk to our neighbors. Um, Someone says ignoring them isn't productive. You have to hope that it can be productive, or if nothing else, cynically play it as a numbers game.
Cynically play it as a numbers game. I wonder what that means.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. So, so anyway, people don't see it, 77%.
Hmm. They're saying
So
it's never productive. I think.
never productive. I think
Yeah.
I think diametrically opposed is probably the cue here. I think if it were people who are just have an opposite opinion of you, um, there's probably discussion room. But diametrically, like there's no chance.
I think
Maybe there's.
diametrically opposed is the same thing as opposite, though. It's just
I think it adds emphasis
on the
to
side of the
how
circle.
opposed they are.
It's like the sides of
Yeah,
the sides
I
of
think
this
it
side,
adds
right?
emphasis to how opposed they are, though.
Yeah, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So
But I don't know. I think we may be in
that's like
trouble
on everything.
if
So,
that's
so what?
where we are, and if that's where we are as a people, we may
We
be.
are.
Yeah, we may be in trouble.
Oh, we're
Yeah.
in trouble. No, there's no maybe. We are absolutely, positively in trouble to the point where if we do have midterms, I cannot trust that they will be carried out fairly.
Hmm.
And beyond that, it would not be out of the realm of possibility for there to be some semblance of a civil war before his term is up.
I would not entirely be surprised if we have something like that in the near future, unfortunately. But let
Yeah.
me ask
He's
you,
already mobilizing military
right,
on
right.
soil.
Let me ask you this, I guess, as a lawyer. Let me lawyer up the question a little, because the poll question we asked was, is it ever productive to have discussions with people with diametrically opposed views? Is that how we phrased
Right.
it?
Yeah.
So I guess there's an implication in there that the discussions are about those views that they differ about, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to just never talking at all to people with a different
Right.
viewpoint, right? Because let's say you go to the supermarket, you might not know, you're probably not going to know what their politics are, people that you're talking to, the
Right.
cashier or whoever, right?
Right.
Um, is this suggesting that you should never speak to them at all? It's never worthwhile having a conversation with them, even if it's not about those views, right? Or let's say
Right.
you did identify them, they're wearing a button for a candidate or whatever, right? Like for whatever reason, you knew their views. Does that mean that you should never speak to them about anything? So if you're in the store, how much does this shirt cost? You shouldn't ask them because their views are
Right.
different from you. You should ask the person who has the same views as you. Is that what that's getting at, or you think it's really just more about talking about those subjects?
I think this is implying talking about the subjects, especially
Mm-hmm.
coming off of the discussion that we've had. But you're right. I mean, does that mean completely withdrawing? If we
Right.
look at it another way, Does that mean that? Like, for example, you know, um, you're somewhere and someone's wearing a MAGA hat and you just completely ignore them, like you get into an elevator and there's somebody with a MAGA hat on and you don't bother to say, "Oh, which floor are you going to?" because you're going to push the buttons. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
just like, yeah, I'm
Right.
just not going to engage with you at all.
Yeah. Yeah. You're a firefighter running into a burning building. You're not going to save someone because they voted for a different candidate. I mean, is that where we are?
Um, I don't think I don't think that extreme, but I
Mhm.
think we are to the point uh where some of it just should not be tolerated
Yeah.
anymore. I
I mean,
think
because I'll be
something.
honest, I see most of this polarization online, and I
Yeah.
think that's in part because that's where a lot of this discussion takes place, right? When you're out in the real world, you're not always talking about political issues or really any
Right.
types of issues with people, right? You might be just going about your day. You're sharing the elevator together. You're having coffee at Starbucks. You know what I mean? Like we said, it could be a firefighter, a policeman on the street, or whatever. It could be anyone working in any job or in any environment,
Right.
right? When you're interacting with people in public, it seems to me that you're speaking to people of all different views, and for the most part, people are getting along. Um,
Right.
right? I think the arguments obviously happen once those views are discussed, and that's natural. But these bubbles maybe are more happening online, right? Like when we're in the real world, we're interacting with all sorts of people all the time.
Well, I think with online is that you can find that group, right?
Yeah,
And stay in that group. When you're out in the world, like you said, you don't know who you're standing next to.
right.
You can, of course, go to, events or meetings that align with your group, but when you're walking through the grocery store, you don't necessarily know who that is.
And you don't
So
care. People don't, you know what I mean? Like you hold the door open for someone, you're like, oh, before you walk through here, tell me who you voted for. No one says that.
no one, yeah, right. I think unless there's some visual, if someone's wearing a MAGA hat, I
Mhm.
think
It
then
could it
people
could have some
know
kind of visceral reaction. Yeah.
we know where you stand, and then so someone may act on that regard. Oh, I'm not going to hold the door for that person, right?
Right, right, right.
You
Well,
know,
it's kind of like remember the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago with the garden, and someone was like, "I'm not going to garden with a Zionist."
right, right, right.
Sounds outrageous to me, like as a sentence. That sounds crazy, right? It's gardening, but
Well,
you know,
hey, listen, man,
this is where we are.
gardening's how we
So
survive.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I,
I think
it's
you
just funny
want
to
to
me that
be
like,
optimistic.
yeah. Well, let me ask you this: like, let's say you have, I guess this is all circumstantial, just depends on the situation. But you make friends. Maybe they're friends from work or from some social activity that you do. There are people who I guess is a popular again. Or I'm seeing like when I walk through Brooklyn in certain places, they have comic book stores, and there are people gathered playing Dungeons and Dragons,
Sure, sure.
right? Like things like that. So like different like social groups that people are in, and they meet people, right? Doing their activities, their hobbies, whatever. You become friends with people. You never talk politics. Maybe they're your friends for years, even.
All right,
Then at a certain point, you discover that they have different political views than you.
all right,
According to this poll, does that mean you should no longer associate with them?
right. Well, I think it matters what the political views are,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Eh, And your position on those views. Someone who someone who is you know, I don't know, pro, civil rights violations, then yeah, I'm probably not going to talk to you anymore. There's no
True,
point.
true. But that
You know what I
also, I
mean?
think, right. But that's a matter of, is it really even a political view at that point, or is it just a matter of not having human decency, right?
But I
Disrespecting
mean,
you for who you are.
right. But if you hold certain political views and you're willing to
They
vote
cross,
and
yes.
evangelize for those, then
Right.
that is your character. That's your humanity. Now, if it's someone
Did you
who
say you
like
evangelize for those?
evangelize
That's
for
a
it,
good
yeah.
word. I like that word. Okay.
Now if it's someone who, I'm not for the death penalty. If
Mm-hmm.
they are,
Yeah.
we have a difference of opinion in
Right.
this political point.
Right.
It's not, to me, it doesn't reach the level of, okay, we're never talking again.
Right, right. Or if you want the
You know,
marginal tax rate to be 37%, they want 39%. Right.
right? I
Yeah.
think the minimum wage should be increased. They think
Yeah.
it shouldn't be. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is not one of those types of issues. I think
And
if it's
those are, and that's a good point. Those are the types of differences I think that people used to debate, right? Like Democrats and
yeah,
Republicans would debate about that, and maybe that's why it wasn't as contentious as it is now because things get more personal when you start talking about civil rights, for example.
right. Well, and that's the thing. These days, those types of
Yeah,
issues are more under attack,
yeah,
more vocal about being it, more blatant, and so it sets up this. Listen, I've got a friend of mine that I've known since high school. We don't really talk anymore because he is clearly conservative now.
hmm.
Um,
Also,
and
by the way, some people that's all they want to talk about. Like if they make that their whole identity,
right,
always bringing that stuff up. And if you don't agree with that, and if you think that that's like a vile position to have, it isn't only
right,
that they have that position; it's that they literally won't talk about anything else. So what is there even to
right,
talk to them about anymore?
right. Yeah, absolutely. And so it definitely depends in that regard as far as how you interact with people and
Yeah,
where their views might be.
right, right. And I think that also gets to again the discussion about the garden because a lot of this is about First Amendment rights and political views and discriminating against people for their views or their identities or whatever, right? All these issues kind of intertwined. But I think that the people involved in a garden probably don't look at it as a matter of politics. They probably look at it as a matter of human rights and decency, right? And I was like, an
Right,
identity, like this is just who we are. And so we're
right.
celebrating our identities. Who are you to come in and say that that's a political view? And you know what I mean? Like it's not politics.
Sure, sure.
This is just basic decency. This is just being a regular compassionate person. That's probably
Right.
how they're viewing it. And so sometimes,
Absolutely.
right there is that tension there. Like when is it a matter of politics and when is it more than that?
Right. And I think what at least anyone who knows me needs to know if they do have those diametrically opposed views and they are talking about them, I will call them out. I
Right.
will challenge them on those opinions. And I think, you know, you might need to instead of letting certain things stand.
Well,
And it doesn't
well,
matter if
but,
they're
but that's
friends, if they're
okay.
family.
But that puts you in that 23%, right? Because you're
Sure.
talking to them, calling
Right.
them out is still having a discussion with them, right? It's still
Yeah.
engaging with them, as opposed to the 77% here who
Right.
seem to be saying, put your head in the
I'm
sand.
just gonna get up and leave. I'm just
Right, right,
right.
right. Or
Yeah,
bury
there's
your
just
head in the
certain
sand. Yeah.
there's
And you know what? This
certain
reminds me of
ignorances.
something. Remember, we had, I don't know if we discussed it on here or not, but it was on my Facebook page. I posed a question because some people were uh, upset about, I think it was, maybe it was school curriculum. Maybe it was discussed on here. Remember, there was, it had to do with the LGBTQ movement and a certain figure that was being included in the curriculum. And then there were some conservative groups that were opposed to it. And they said that that shouldn't be taught to kids because it's like too young to be teaching them about that kind of stuff, even though it was just about kind of like the history of the civil rights movement. But as a
Oh, you're talking about the guy who helped organize the March on Washington. His
yes,
name was mentioned in the textbook,
with Martin
and
Luther King, right?
it was mentioned in the textbook, and we analyzed those passages, and they were pretty tame. It was just history
Right,
type of
right.
things, but someone
Yeah.
took it another way.
And they said that the kids shouldn't be taught that or something. But anyway, yeah. So just the fact that we put the question out there, some people were upset because they thought we were legitimizing an issue that shouldn't even be
Rustin,
legitimized.
Bayard Rustin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's the difference, right? Like, do you engage with these issues that are issues, whether we like it or not? We should say that, we might say they shouldn't be issues, but they are at a certain point, right? Because enough people are talking about it and making noise about it. I mean, if you just walk away, if that's your approach, you're kind of ceding the argument to the other side, right? Because you're letting their perspective on it, their narrative,
Right.
be the prevailing one.
Sure.
So I don't know. So I seem to come down on the side that says, for the most part, we should engage. We should have these discussions. We should be listening as well, right? Doesn't mean that we have to agree with anything that we're hearing, but we should be listening, even if it's for the sake of knowing how to make a well-reasoned counterpoint. So I don't think the burying your head in the sand approach is really the productive one.
In some cases, I
Right.
think
And
you're right.
there may be exceptions, right? Because you do have
Yeah.
to maintain your sanity, like we said. If you're talking to someone who's just constantly going off on these crazy points all the time, you're not getting anywhere, and it's just gonna, drive everyone insane.
Right. There's just no talking to them,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So, all
But
right.
as always,
So,
I guess there's nuance in this stuff, right?
right. So bottom line, what's the bottom line? Or was that the bottom line?
I think so. So how do we start off? We were talking a lot about the executive order and free speech.
Right.
So we talked about how free speech does apply to everyone, even just to people who are saying things that we don't agree with. I think, yeah, I think that kind of brings it all together, right? That we all have a voice. We all have different viewpoints and opinions. We don't have to agree. We shouldn't agree with the things that we're saying all the time, right? We should be able to have our own thoughts and conclusions on things. Maybe for the sake of our sanity, we don't always engage with people who are saying crazy things, but I think for the most part, we should welcome diversity of thought. And the cure for bad speech is more speech. It isn't walking away and letting the bad speech dominate the conversation.
Okay. All right. And people can find us on YouTube and Instagram at Nuance Show, Facebook as well. And yeah, get involved, get engaged, and subscribe to the podcast. It's everywhere podcasts are available.
Yes. Excellent. As always, thank you for joining us. We've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time.